Okay, let's dive in. We've got quite a bit of material here, sources that really take us deep into the highlands of Papua New Guinea.
Yeah, it's a fascinating area. We're looking at a really remote culture, this mysterious, tragic disease, and the science that eventually figured it all out.
Right, and our kind of mission here, based on these sources, is to understand this, well, this paradox, isn't it? How something done out of love and respect could lead to such devastation.
Exactly. And then how science, and just as importantly, the community's own strength, turned things around. It's quite a story.
And it really starts with the Fore people. Tell us about them.
Okay, so the Fore. You have to picture this. They're living way up in these misty mountains in New Guinea. An agricultural community, pretty isolated, living in small hamlets.
Scattered around.
Yes, scattered. And they have this incredibly deep connection to their land, their families, and especially their ancestors. That's really key.
So that sense of community, that reverence for those who came before, that's sort of central to their whole worldview.
Absolutely central. Communal living is everything. Huge respect for elders, huge respect for the dead, and their spirituality is all woven into that honoring ancestors, feeling connected to the land.
Which leads us to this very specific and, well, for outsiders, maybe quite jarring custom.
It does. Their main funerary practice. See, for the Fore, death wasn't really an endpoint. It was a transition.
Yeah.
So they practiced endocannibalism.
Meaning they consumed parts of their own relatives who had passed away.
That's right. But the why is crucial here. It wasn't, aggression. It wasn't about food or hunger in the typical sense.
It was about connection, keeping the spirit close.
Precisely. It was seen as this incredibly sacred act, the ultimate way to show love and respect. By consuming parts of the body, especially the brain, they believed they were keeping that person's spirit, their essence, their wisdom alive.
Keeping it within the family, within the community.
Yeah, preventing it from just like decaying in the earth and being lost. It was about continuity.
That really does flip our usual Western ideas about mourning completely. The sources also mentioned specific roles, didn't they, who mainly performed this ritual?
Yes, and this turned out to be, well, tragically important. It was primarily the women and children.
Ah.
Women in particular often consumed the brain. They saw it as the source of identity, of thought, of wisdom.
And that specific detail became a terrible clue down the line.
A major one. Because this act, this profound expression of love and connection, it had this awful, completely unforeseen consequence.
Kuru.
Kuru, yeah. Around the mid-20th century, this new, terrifying illness starts spreading like wildfire, but only among the Fore.
And the name Kuru, what does that mean?
In their language, it means something like to tremble or to shake with fear.
Yeah.
And I mean, it was aptly named. The symptoms were just dreadful.
Can you describe it?
It started with uncontrollable shaking, tremors, then a loss of coordination, what doctors call ataxia. People couldn't walk properly.
Difficulty speaking, too.
Yes, difficulty speaking. Sometimes these strange emotional outbursts, like laughing or crying at inappropriate times, then trouble swallowing, dysphagia, and eventually total incapacitation. People couldn't move, couldn't eat.
And it was fatal.
Always.
Yeah.
Usually within, say, 9 months to a year after the first symptoms appeared. Just relentless.
Devastating. And you mentioned that pattern earlier, who was getting sick.
That was the crucial early clue for the researchers who started coming in. It was overwhelmingly women and children.
Which pointed right back to the funerary custom.
It strongly suggested a link, yeah. Something that women and children were doing or being exposed to that men weren't, or at least not to the same degree.
So how did the outside world even start to piece this together? We're talking about a very remote group, a practice unknown to Western science.
Well, it took dedicated people on the ground. Figures like Vincent Zegas, an Australian medical officer who was already there, and then, really importantly, Daniel Carleton Gajdusek.
An American researcher.
A virologist, yeah.
Yeah.
And Gajdusek was kind of uniquely prepared for this challenge, even if he didn't know it at the time.
How so? What was his background?
Well, his biography paints this picture of someone with just immense curiosity. Early influences in entomology, chemistry, math, physics, a really broad scientific grounding.
Okay.
And importantly, his upbringing in Yonkers exposed him to diverse immigrant communities, languages, cultures. It gave him this, openness. Then he had mentors like Dr. Joseph Smidle at Walter Reed, who really encouraged him to go out in the field, study disease patterns in Well, what they termed primitive cultures back then.
So not just a lab scientist.
Not at all. Smidle basically helped create a position for him at the NIH specifically for this kind of work, studying child growth and disease in unique, isolated populations. That's how his lab, focusing on slow, latent, and temperate viruses, got started, directly because of Kuru.
And he actually went and lived with the Fore.
He did. He spent significant time there, learned the language, observed their lives, built trust. That cultural immersion was absolutely vital. It wasn't just about taking samples. It was about understanding the context.
So what was the breakthrough? How did he figure out Kuru?
Well, the first big step was ruling things out. He worked with others, like Joe Gibbs at the NIH, trying to transmit the disease to chimpanzees, which eventually they did after long incubation periods. But Gajdusek realized it wasn't behaving like a typical bacteria or a virus.
The usual suspects for infectious disease.
Exactly. It didn't trigger the usual immune responses, couldn't be seen under standard microscopes in the same way. It was something different.
And that difference was?
It was a prion, a concept that was, revolutionary at the time.
Prions. We hear that word now maybe with mad cow disease or CJD, but then?
Brand new idea. The sources explain it simply. Basically, a misfolded protein. Just a protein that's gone wrong, shape-wise.
And what makes that dangerous?
The scary part is, this misfolded protein acts like a bad influence. When it bumps into a normal version of the same protein in the brain, it makes the normal one misfold too.
Like a domino effect.
Exactly, a chain reaction. These misfolded proteins start clumping together, building up, and essentially destroying brain tissue, causing those devastating neurological symptoms.
And the link back to the Fore custom became chillingly clear.
Heartbreakingly clear. The prion agent was concentrated in the brain tissue of people who died of Kuru.
So when women and children consumed the brain as part of the mourning ritual,
they were ingesting the infectious agent. The very act meant to honor the dead to keep their essence alive was the root of transmission. Love and respect were inadvertently spreading the fatal disease.
Wow. That is just profoundly tragic. And discovering this whole new class of infectious agent, the prion, that must have been a monumental scientific achievement.
Absolutely huge.
Yeah.
It changed our understanding of infectious disease. And for this work, explaining Kuru and its transmission, Gajdusek was awarded the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1976.
Okay, so science identifies the cause. But then comes maybe the even harder part, explaining this to the Fore community. How do you convince people to stop a practice so deeply tied to their spirituality and identity?
Yeah, that's an immense hurdle. It wasn't just Gajdusek. It involved local health workers, missionaries who were there, and critically, the Fore leaders themselves. It took years of patient explanation, building trust, showing the link between the practice and the disease.
It couldn't have been easy. There must have been resistance, disbelief.
Undoubtedly.
Yeah.
But the Fore were also seeing the devastation firsthand. They saw their wives, mothers, children dying horribly, and faced with that reality and the scientific explanation, they made an incredibly difficult, courageous choice.
They chose to stop the practice.
Yes, voluntarily. They decided, as a community, to end endocannibalism to save future generations.
What happened then? Did Kuru cases stop?
The impact was dramatic. New cases started to decline sharply almost immediately after the practice stopped. Now, because prions can have incredibly long incubation periods, sometimes decades cases, linked to exposures before the ban continued to emerge for many years.
Right, people already infected.
Exactly. But the transmission cycle itself was broken. The epidemic was effectively ended by the Fore's decision.
An incredible story of community action based on understanding. But wait, there's another twist, isn't there? Something about genetics.
Yes. This is almost the coda to the story, and it's astonishing. Later research, looking at the Fore population over time, found evidence of rapid human evolution happening right there.
Evolution? How?
They discovered that some Fore individuals, particularly descendants of those who survived the worst of the epidemic, had developed a genetic mutation, potentially something called the G127V variant, though research continues.
And this mutation did what?
It conferred resistance. It actually protected them against Kuru, and likely other prion diseases too.
So the intense pressure of the Kuru epidemic literally selected for individuals with this protective gene. Natural selection in action, incredibly fast.
That's precisely it. It's one of the clearest examples ever documented of natural selection operating powerfully in a human population in response to an infectious disease. It's a testament to human adaptability.
It really is. It offers hope and incredible insight into how we can evolve to resist disease.
Absolutely. It adds this whole other layer to the Fore story. resilience, not just culturally, but biologically too.
So looking back at this whole deep dive, we started with this unique culture, the Fore, their profound connection to ancestors expressed through endocannibalism, then this horrifying disease, Kuru.
Yeah, then the scientific detective work, Gajdusek, the discovery of prions, a totally new biological agent.
Followed by the community's incredibly hard decision to change a core tradition, leading to the decline of the disease.
And finally, this amazing evidence of genetic adaptation, of evolution happening right before our eyes almost.
It really drives home the complex dance between culture, tradition, biology, and health, doesn't it?
It really does. And it shows up a power of science, not just to understand, but to provide knowledge that empowers communities to make life-saving changes. But it also highlights the resilience of people, their ability to adapt.
The Fore story, it's marked by such tragedy, but it ends up being this incredible symbol of strength, survival, and hope.
A truly powerful narrative.
It makes you think, though. What does this whole story teach us about those times when science bumps up against deeply held cultural beliefs? How do we navigate that kind of challenge?
That's the big question, isn't it? How do you build trust? How do communities make these profound shifts? What can we learn from the Fore about adaptation, about survival, about facing the unthinkable?
Definitely gives you a lot to